What is going on, everybody? Been a diehard Pistons fan since '03 and starting to get cautiously optimistic about this Pistons team. Last night, the Pistons played against the Miami Heat, and in that game, Tim Hardaway Jr. suffered a brutal head injury that was no fun to watch and we knew would keep him sidelined for some point in time. But what we did not know, and I personally did not expect, is that both Jaden Ivey and Simone have been ruled out tonight. Both of them have toe injuries and will not be playing in tonight's game against the Milwaukee Bucks. So in this video, we're going to go through and talk about 4 players that will likely have their role increased tonight and potentially more games going forward, as we don't really have a timeline for any of these players' injuries currently. So the first player that I do want to talk about is going to be Marcus Sasser. Now, Marcus Sasser is a second-year player that was on the roster last year, played a good bit last year, averaging 19 minutes per game, but he has yet to see the floor very much at all this season. He's currently only played in 4 games. I think out of those 4 games, it's mostly been garbage time, besides one situation where Jaden Ivey got himself in foul trouble. The Pistons are clearly very short on depth with point guards. Cade and Ivey have been the only point guards to really play for the Pistons in any meaningful minutes yet this year. JB Bickerstaff staggers those two. One or the other is always on the court in crucial minutes, but since Ivey's out, that means that Marcus Sasser is going to be the clear favorite to take that backup point guard role, because we really don't have anybody else on the roster who can manage that position. Marcus Sasser, as I mentioned, did play a lot more last season. He played in 71 games last year, 19 minutes a game, 8 points per game in those. So I think that he will be okay. I'm really not worried about Marcus Sasser. I know that he isn't in exactly his preferred role as a true point guard, or what I would deem as his preferred role, because he's not exactly a great playmaker. He's more of a scoring combo guard than he is a pure point guard. But I'm personally excited to see what Marcus Sasser can do, because the one thing about him is he can provide a scoring punch and score in bunches. And at times, when Cade has been off the court, we have had some pretty bad offensive lapses. So personally, I'm excited to see what Marcus Sasser can do in some extended minutes. We haven't seen much of him this year. I enjoyed him last year being a contributor. Of course, the team was a lot worse last year, but I felt like there was a lot of good takeaways throughout the beginning of the season. He was shooting the ball at a very good clip. So I do have faith in Marcus Sasser as a player. But what I'm not certain of is how well he will look in a point guard role, and that is exactly what he's going to be doing tonight and potentially going forward until Jaden Ivey is back, just due to the lack of point guard depth on the roster. I know a lot of people have campaigned for them to sign some more point guards or a backup point guard, whatever it might be. Of course, that has not happened, so Marcus Sasser will be getting some extended minutes, presumably. So the second player that I do want to talk about is going to be Wendell Moore. Wendell Moore is a player that we got from the Minnesota Timberwolves in a trade this summer, and we haven't seen a whole lot of him. During the summer league, he only played in 2 games of that. He did not look particularly good in any of those games. And then throughout the regular season so far, he has not gotten many minutes at all, definitely not any meaningful minutes. However, with Simone and Tim Hardaway Jr. both being out, now we are lacking depth at the wing spot, so I feel pretty confident in saying that he will likely get some minutes tonight and going forward until one of the 3 of Tim, Simone, and Ausar get back. I personally have not watched a ton of Wendell Moore. When he was with the Minnesota Timberwolves, he was kind of buried on the bench there. During his time at Duke, he was a decent player, but that's all the way back in the college days. So I'm intrigued. I'm curious to see what Wendell Moore can do on the court. All I really want from him, or can hope from him, is the ability to defend and hopefully knock down some open shots. Really don't foresee him being much of a creator or doing anything along those lines with the ball in his hands a whole bunch, but hoping that he can make a positive impact in the minutes that he will likely see, just because we are so depleted on the wing now that Tim and Simone will both not be playing tonight. So the third player I do want to talk about is going to be Ron Holland. Unlike the first two players that we talked about in this video, Ron has actually been getting some minutes for the Pistons team, which is pretty clear if you have been watching because he has played in all 12 games and he's averaging 15 minutes per game. Currently, he's averaging 5 points per game, and I expect all of those numbers to increase due to that lack of wing depth. With Simone being out and Tim Hardaway Jr. being out, I would expect for Malik Beasley to take that starting role that is typically Tim Hardaway's for now. But Ron Holland very well might shoe in there. It wouldn't shock me at all if he does. But nevertheless, he will be getting almost certainly more than his typical 15 minutes per night while all of these wings are currently hurt. Really hoping that Ron Holland can start to progress as a shooter. He's currently shooting 15% from the 3-point line. Teams have been completely ignoring him out there, and that does cause some issues. But everything else outside of that has been incredibly impressive in my eyes for Ron Holland, especially considering that he's a 19-year-old rookie. So really hoping to see some good extended minutes from Ron Holland as we go through this period where we are lacking wings due to injury. Now, the last player that I do want to talk about is going to be Paul Reed. Now, the first three players that we went through, Sasser, Moore, and Holland, all have a pretty clear path to more minutes going forward for the time being, or at least tonight. Paul Reed does not have that just because with Sasser, needs to fill the gap with Ivey being out. With Holland and Moore, their roles will increase due to a couple wings being out. But we don't have any sort of issues at the big spot now that Duren is back from injury. Paul Reed, of course, got more minutes when he was out. So it's not like a one-for-one replacement in this case where I would expect him to get more minutes. But at the end of the day, with Asar, Klintman, Tim, Simone, and Ivey being out, that leaves like 9 guys on our active roster. And JB might just turn and use Paul Reed in a power forward role, which hasn't happened yet this year. I don't believe if it did happen, it was for very, very short periods of minutes. I'm kind of thinking back in my head now, maybe it did, but it wasn't for very long that Paul Reed had shared the floor with either of Stewart or Duren. He's been always a 5 for the most part in his minutes. But it wouldn't shock me if JB does go ahead and try Paul Reed at the 4 or him out there with Stewart at the same time, both kind of just playing 2 big spots because, as I mentioned, we're down to like 9 active players on the roster. As far as the two-way guys go, don't really expect any of them to check in and get a bunch of burn. But if it does happen, I wouldn't be completely shocked either. So will be interesting to see how these guys can do. Really hoping that one of these 4 players can step up and make a bigger impact than they normally do. And we'll be excited to see how it goes. So let me know what you guys think, and we'll catch up soon.